Hi again, everyone. James Atkinson here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Drinks Adventures podcast. I'm talking Australian whisky this week with Starward Whisky founder David Vitale. Founded in Melbourne in 2007, Starward is undoubtedly the leading Australian whisky brand from a volume perspective, thanks to David's ambitious strategy of pursuing larger scale production from the very beginning. This has meant that Starward has been able to offer its range of high quality whiskies at pretty affordable price points. They commonly sit under the $100 mark, in contrast to the routine pricing upwards of $200 a bottle that you see from most other Australian distillers. Now, I don't know about you, but that puts them out of reach for me as whiskies to consume on an everyday basis. David and I discussed this pricing differential and some of the other challenges for Australian whisky, as well as his recent decision to relocate to North America to develop it as an export market. We also touch on Starward's sale of a part share to Distill Ventures, a subsidiary of the world's largest spirits company, Diageo, and Starward's recent expansion into distilling gin, which I remind David is something he said they would never do. And lastly, the company's entry into bottled cocktails, with the launch of the Starward New Old Fashioned, of which Starward has put a bottle up for grabs at the end of the show today. All right, well, David, thanks very much for joining us for a chat.
Absolute pleasure. It's good to see you again.
Now, just to kick off my questions, I'm going to ask you something which someone asked on a whisky page on Facebook this week. Why is Australian whisky so super expensive? Starward seems like the only distillery without jacked up prices. Maybe you can shed some light on that for this gentleman.
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, I think my view is that, and this is not even regarding Australian whiskies, it's just generally, any whiskey that's over about the $100 price point, you're either playing for scarcity or marketing, or probably a bit of both. And so in the context of Australian whiskey, there's no doubt that all of the distillers, I'd be proud to kind of have as my own and offer the world, such as the quality of them. But the challenge is that there's, under substantially constrained stock. And so while they're still trying to build inventory, it just kind of means that the prices, the cost per litre is going to be a lot higher. And I guess from day one of the things that was really important for me was that, we began with the end in mind, which was like a really affordable, easy to drink whiskey that we can offer the world, and if we're going to do that and compete with the rest of the world, we needed to be competitive from a price perspective. So we scaled up very early in the hope, belief in the hope that the market would meet us. And we've been really fortunate to have a great tailwind in terms of the rise of craft whiskies around the world. And so a lot of that scale has been absorbed and we've been able to afford to reinvest on that basis. But it's just based on the fact that we laid a hell of a lot of whiskey away very early, which meant that the cost per litre was a lot lower.
Having said that, I am aware of some larger players coming into the market in Australia at the moment that are a bit better resourced and look like they want to do things at scale as well. What do you think that means for the smaller, the micro distillers, if you will?
Yeah, I think the great thing about whiskey, and this is regardless of where it comes from around the world, is that you've got the ability to really take advantage of a story, as a producer. And so if you're able to kind of build that narrative around something that's distinctive and unique and actually offers somebody something that they can't get in other places, then you can afford to offer it for a premium. But if we're talking about, the internet time machines are wonderful things. You might want to look this up. But one of the earlier distillers kind of had on their website, we make Tasmanian whiskey in the finest of Scottish traditions. And in that context, you have to ask yourself, well, why? Why would you bother to buy that whiskey in the finest of Scottish traditions when you can buy a Scotch whiskey in the finest of Scottish traditions? So my view is that, price is only going to be an issue if you don't have a point of difference.
Yeah, and you think that, there still could be a place in the market for those guys who are doing the single casks and able to charge $200 a bottle purely because it's scarce?
It's scarce, 100%. There's no reason why that can't exist. And I think at the end of the day, drinkers vote with their hip pocket, and there are plenty of people that are happy to find interesting and scarce whiskies and have them part of that special occasion cabinet. As much as there are plenty, there's a lot more, but there are plenty of people that just want a whiskey for the sharing cabinet. And, firmly from day one, we've always thought of ourselves as a sharing cabinet whiskey.
And you never do special releases. They're going to be like, the absolute rarest of oldest cask.
Last year was our 10th anniversary of production. That moment in time when I thought, that's it, we're all in. I kind of looked at my wife and said, we're all in. And so that was 10 years ago, or 11 years ago on Sunday, actually. So we released a 10th anniversary whiskey last year. But
it was actually quite an affordable price point compared to Sullivan's Cove's put out something this week that was $750 a bottle. So
yeah, and look, from our point of view, it was about basically saying, it's some of our oldest and rarest stock in that bottling. But, we take the view that whiskey is to be shared and enjoyed. And for us, those limited releases, which are becoming more and more sought after and challenging for us to meet the market, are really a reward for loyalty to our kind of most closest fans than it is an opportunity to, increase margins and do those sorts of things. So for us, we're firmly of the opinion, we want to be a bit more of a democratic approach to whiskey sales.
One of the things I'm seeing in the market at the moment is the erosion of boundaries between different categories of drinks, and probably one of the most prominent examples of that recently has been Jameson Caskmates, Pernod Ricard actually buying a brewery so they can keep, making that whiskey that's being held in casks that have previously had beer in them. What do you think is actually driving that whole trend towards experimentation?
Well, I think, and craft beer probably is the biggest driver, actually. So if you think about 10 or 15 years ago, maybe even more, it was really the two majors, CUB and Lion, that kind of had the lion's share of everybody's throat when it came to beer. And we've seen that kind of change quite dramatically because people are interested in, flavour-driven drinks. And so I think that's really driving it is people seeking out bigger flavours, interesting flavours. And, my journey really actually began in craft beer. Starward was originally going to be a craft brewery, right? But good beer doesn't travel well. And, in my mind, I really wanted to create something that we could take to the world. And so, as we know, whiskey is just a distilled beer. And so my mantra from day one is, a craft beer drinker is a Starward drinker that doesn't know it yet. So I think that's really been a big catalyst and an eye-opener for drinkers generally. And, we're seeing, everything's getting bigger in terms of flavour, and I think that's driving it.
And on that note, you've recently gone into the gin business. I'm pretty sure I recall you being quite adamant about saying that, we'd rather focus on doing one thing and doing it well. Yeah. So I was a little bit surprised when I saw the gin came out.
The quote was, if you chase two rabbits, you're not likely to catch any. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
I wasn't imagining it. It wasn't some other guy.
No, it was me. And this is when you say never, right? No, look, the gin's an indulgence, and by no stretch of the imagination do we think we're going to compete with the Four Pillars of the world or the Archie Roses of the world or the amazing gin producers in Australia. And that's not the intention. I think what we're trying to do, and it comes back to that whole idea of flavour, is just really, I think, making gin from a whiskey perspective and thinking about it from that point of view, as opposed to necessarily saying, well, this is a modern twist on a traditional dry gin using Australian botanicals or pushing the boundaries of gin. It's really just basically something that we do. And there's small batches, 700 bottles at a time. Really, if I'm being honest, it's just to make sure that the bar at home's stocked with, some gin every now and then when the guys at Four Pillars don't keep me stocked up.
So it's just a little side project, a bit of fun.
It's definitely a side project. We're not getting into the gin business in any serious way.
We're obviously here because of the launch of the bottled cocktails. Maybe you could just tell us about what your thinking was there.
Yeah, look, I guess I'm in a quite unique position in that when I go to dinner parties or barbecues or picnics, people expect me to bring whiskey along. I'm a distiller, I own a distillery. It's kind of almost rude if I don't bring whiskey. But most people, I feel like when they bring a bottle of whiskey to a party, everyone else is thinking, oh, here's trouble. And so I wanted to kind of think about, well, how can we make a difference here? Because ultimately, whiskey is best enjoyed in a shared environment, and my two passions in life are my family and obviously whiskey, and I love Melbourne. And if you kind of put all those three things together, food's kind of at the centre of those things. And so one of the things that really motivated us to think beyond the box was like, well, how can we be at the dinner table, and what can we do to kind of help that idea come along? And the biggest challenge with whiskey is its strength in the first instance, and therefore you go, well, let's make cocktails with it. Who can make a great bartender quality cocktail at home? It's very difficult to do. So what we wanted to do is say, well, you can have a quality spirit, all of the provenance and value that, Starward kind of brings to the table in terms of that, the wine credentials of the barrels, the spirit itself, a consistent product every single time, a consistent drink every single time, and it's really convenient. So, you don't have to keep running back to the kitchen to make more, and kept in the fridge and just basically poured over ice and off you go.
Obviously, the release is the Starward Old Fashioned. Is there potential to expand that range?
So the idea behind the bottled cocktail is that we'll release a series. So this is number one. We'll have, ideally more in the range. But unlike other producers who might have 4 or 5 on the shelf that you can choose from, these will be limited in release. So when the Old Fashioned is done, it's done, and we'll move on to the next one and the one after that. And the idea behind that is that really what we're doing is running into the bond store and identifying a parcel of barrels that we think fits the cocktail, or that could work with a particular cocktail, as opposed to shoehorning the standard Starward releases into different cocktails. So it's giving us an opportunity to really explore the boundaries of the bond store too, and find interesting parcels of whiskey that we can use for the cocktails.
So what do you look for in the whiskey for this particular Old Fashioned? Because I just actually had one, and it was probably on the drier side for an Old Fashioned, which I actually like, because often when you buy that as a cocktail, it can be really sweet.
Sweet, that's right. So we had to strike a balance of, if it's going to be at the dinner table, you can't have it as a dessert. So that was kind of the first point there. But, look, the bottom line is, the main ingredient in an Old Fashioned is whiskey. And so that has to sing. That's where we always start. And then what we wanted to do was say, well, there are, classic whiskey cocktails are classics for a reason. They don't need much work to kind of make them anything else. They've stood the test of time. And so what we tried to do in that regard was just think about how we can really bring out the Starward characteristics and also make them versatile at the dinner table. So as we know, an Old Fashioned is basically whiskey, sugar syrup and bitters. And what we've done in this instance is really kind of worked on the sugar syrup and the bitters aspect to just enhance the characteristics and the flavours. So some of that dryness is also coming from the wattle seed that we've infused into the sugar syrup.
So you sort of combine the sugars and the sugar and the bitters ingredient, basically. That's
right. So it's effectively a spiced sugar syrup, if you want to think of it that way, alongside bitters as well. And so that kind of gives it a deeper palate, a more complex palate that can consider the dinner table more readily.
Sure, and obviously you took the investment from Distill Ventures, the Diageo subsidiary, a few years ago now. Yeah. Is there an end in sight for, where they're going to want to take control of the company? Is that something that's on the cards anytime soon?
Not anytime soon. And look, I think Distill Ventures has been transformational for Starward. Like, it's given me the ability to really go after that ambition that we set early on, which is to be in every sharing cabinet around the world. And that's meant investment in plant and equipment and infrastructure, but also kind of support to make sure that we're able to navigate our way through the world of brand building without minimising the mistakes. Without making mistakes is silly, but trying to minimise those mistakes. But that's not to say that it's a Diageo way of doing things. It's effectively saying you've got the wherewithal and the experience to draw on it if you think you need it. And so that's been fantastic. And there's no plans, right now for anything to change at Starward. And even if I think ownership changed, I don't think control would, if that makes sense. We're still a baby in the universe of spirits, and even within that sort of orbit of Diageo, we're a very, very small brand. And they understand that the thing that makes brands like Starward so successful is that leadership from the founding team that kind of came up with the idea. And that's not just me, it's the production distiller, it's the management team, it's there's a certain mentality about startup businesses very different to corporate. So my expectation and and belief, very strong belief, is that for a very long time, despite control or ownership changing, this will still be a founder-led brand that is pursuing the very thing that got them excited about investing in the first instance, which is creating an Australian icon.
You mentioned how small Starward is relative to Diageo's other brands. How far away do you think it is for Australian craft spirits to get serious scale? Yeah,
look, I think the next 5 years is going to be really interesting. If I think back 5 years ago, it was really then that a lot of distilleries were taking big strides to investing in infrastructure and plant to scale up, and we're seeing more and more of that every week nearly. So I think the next 5 years is going to be really interesting in terms of getting the market to scale. We're still a baby. If we use craft beer as an example, we're probably circa 1995 in that story, right? So there's a long, long way to go. And the great thing, though, is that I think our drinker is far more open-minded to drinking craft spirits than we all were drinking craft beer in the late 90s. So that growth is going to happen a lot quicker.
You just dropped a little bit of gem, a little nugget of news just before we started recording, which is that you're moving over to the States. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so when we first started making whiskey, the ambition was to, I can still see the blank sheet of paper, and the first words were to offer the world a uniquely Australian whiskey with pride. And as much as we've done a great job of building the brand in Australia, we're not going to set anyone's hearts racing or achieve that ambition if we don't start to export. And so 10% of our sales at the moment come from effectively London, like the London city. It's not much more but the UK. But we've got an ambition, I think, to kind of get to about 50% of our sales coming from the United States, and like a 40-10 split between Australia and the UK. And so that starts the journey to building the brand in the United States in a month or two, actually. In August, we'll be shipping over our first batch of whiskey. And to do it properly is a lot of shoe leather, there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of masterclasses, and just doing that from Melbourne is going to be really difficult. Not many people know this, but my wife's actually American, so it'll also keep my mother-in-law really happy for us to kind of move to the States and start to be more active in that market.
Pretty crowded craft spirits market that you're going into over there, but I suppose from a whiskey standpoint, you'll be bringing something pretty different to what's available.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So obviously, we're not a bourbon, we're a single malt whiskey, and malt whiskies in the United States made in America need to be in brand new American oak barrels. So the idea of an Australian whiskey in Australian wine barrels matured for 3 years is quite novel and very, very exciting. So I can't wait to get over there because, we've got a great winemaking history and credentials in the US, and so we can kind of hang on those coattails and really celebrate all those great things about Australia and Starward.
So you're not taking them over an IPA made with American hops?
No, that's right. Yeah, it's exactly right. So, I think that the idea is that if we're ever going to be relevant in that sharing cabinet at home or the back bar of great bars around the world, it's got to be because we've got something that's unique and distinctly Australian and that you can tell is Starward or Australian whiskey we think that, those Australian wine barrels are, our secret weapon to doing that.
So who will be filling your shoes in Australia then?
Very good question. We're just in the final processes of recruiting an Australian marketing manager who will take part of the role. It's been quite some time since I put on some work boots and been on the production floor. So very early on, that was a deliberate decision on my part to find a team that I could trust blindly, almost, to kind of take care of the production side of things. So that's taken place, and from a management point of view, we've got a great team, a leadership team. But the last piece in that puzzle's the probably the hardest to let go of, and that's taking care of the activations and the marketing of the business in Australia. But that's not far away.
You're obviously someone who watches what's happening across all categories of spirits and beer. We've certainly discussed, and I'm sure probably other categories as well. What's exciting you right now outside of what Starward's doing?
I think that the most exciting thing is actually the drinker's appetite for craft spirits generally, and Melbourne has an amazing bar called Bad Frankie's, which just stocks Australian spirits. And for those of you that don't live in Melbourne or but are visiting, if there's one place you need to visit to celebrate Australian spirits, that would be it. And so that's really exciting. That's so exciting for me to see that appetite for Australian spirits, and the fact that we can have a bar fully stocked that can make any cocktail in the world just from Australian spirits is something that we should be really proud of and celebrate.
You've noticed that appetite has really picked up in the last few years?
Yeah, I'd say over the last 18 months in particular, and it's off the back of a lot of hard work that, the likes of Bill Lark have been kind of toiling away at for 6 years now, and Patrick Maguire at Sullivan's Cove in the whiskey space, and more recently the team at Four Pillars Gin and Archie Rose and a whole heap of small-scale distilleries just really going out there and explaining to people that, drink less but better, and I think that that's the exciting trend. And of course, for us, one of the things that we get really excited about, because it opens the opportunity for whiskey, is the idea that people are starting to think about cocktails as an alternative to wine or beer, and that's exciting.
And actually, on that note, I remember last time we caught up, I remember you speaking about ice at home, the dilemma of being able to get good quality ice in the home. Are you seeing any solution to that dilemma?
Yes and no. So I think you're able to buy better ice now, which is great. So beyond the stuff you get at a local petrol station or 7-Eleven. So that's been an advancement. In fact, we're seeing trends overseas of convenience stores stocking, blocks of
deoxygenated
quality ice, and so I don't think that that's too far away. So once that happens, we're away, and the challenge at our house is having enough ice. Actually, as much as it's good ice, it's always having enough ice to entertain. So once we've solved that problem, we're well away. But the trick will be getting more venues, more bottle shops to have quality ice that they can kind of sell.
So what ice is in the Vitale arsenal?
Well, fortunately, we've got a 300-person venue at the distillery that we can kind of
Stupid question.
avail us of. So it's not quite, I keep it esky in the back of the car, but almost. So I could just kind of get a couple of buckets and bring them home when I need them.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for a fantastic chat.
Absolutely, pleasure. Thank you.
Now, thanks once again to everyone who has written and given me their feedback via hello@drinksadventures.com.au or with reviews on iTunes and Stitcher. It really is fantastic to get some feedback, and each week for my favourite review on either Stitcher or iTunes, I'm giving away a prize, courtesy of typically the people that I'm speaking to on the program. So this week, thanks to Starward, I'm giving away a bottle of the Starward New Old Fashioned, which if you like old fashions, which I certainly do, it really is a fantastic product, up there with anything that you'd be able to buy in a bar, and actually, to be honest, sometimes better than some of the old fashions that I've had in bars around the place. So get onto iTunes now if you haven't left a review, or Stitcher, and give me your honest feedback on the show. It really is important to get that feedback, and it also helps with boosting us up the rankings, which helps give the show more exposure, as I keep saying. Now, I will be starting to read out some more of these reviews. It is my goal to make this program a little bit more interactive, but sometimes when I'm recording the introduction of the show, I haven't actually gotten around to, figuring out who that week's winner is and all that kind of stuff. But I hope over the next few weeks, I will be able to get the listeners a little bit more involved. So thanks once again. I'm going to wrap up there, and I'll see you again next week.